Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Let me begin by saying that standing House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding, so please keep your cameras on. Also, please remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. If you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party, and I will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. For those members and staff physically present in the committee room today, we will continue to follow the most recent OAP guidance. Masks are no longer required in our meeting space for members and staff who have been fully vaccinated. All members and staff who have not been fully vaccinated are still required to wear masks and socially distance, and sincerely hope we do all of our parts to protect each other and our staff. The COVID-19 pandemic inflicted a once-in-a-lifetime economic shock on our nation. The small businesses that make up the foundation of our economy were particularly hard hit. Despite government efforts, nearly 200,000 businesses that closed their doors during the pandemic may never open. These enterprises were more than just storefronts. They were entrepreneurs' livelihoods, they were job creators and pillars of their communities. As we work towards a full recovery from the pandemic, we must fill the void these closures created. Unfortunately, we are amid a decades-long decline in entrepreneurship rates across the country. In 1982, new firms constituted 38% of all businesses, but that fell to only 29% in 2018. In recent years, the rate at which firms were exiting the market outpaced the rate at which firms entered the market. This decline in entrepreneurship stems from a variety of different factors. Economic crisis like the Great Recession decrease aggregate demand and create a tightened lending environment hurting business startups. High amounts of student loan debt, fewer employment opportunities, the increasing consolidation of businesses have led to slow entrepreneurship rates among millennials. Millennials are on track to be the least entrepreneurial generation in history, with startup rates well below baby boomer and Generation X counterparts. Simply put, we are staring down an entrepreneurship crisis in the country that has the potential to significantly delay our recovery. Moreover, this decline in business startups also can lower productivity, decrease the creation of new technologies, and slow the overall rate of job growth. I think we can all agree that this scenario of economic stagnation is not acceptable. Instead, we need our economy operating at maximum strength, and Congress should consider how we can help reverse the decline in entrepreneurship. This will mean examining existing programs and considering new initiatives to produce an ecosystem that is more favorable to entrepreneurs. One such proposal is my bipartisan bill called the Next Generation Entrepreneurship Core Act, or NextGen. NextGen seeks to accomplish two main objectives: entrepreneurship inclusivity and increase entrepreneurship in distressed regions. The program uses a tried-and-true model based on programs with a track record of positive impacts like Teach for America and the Peace Corps. The bill would create a national business proposal competition that would select fellows annually to start and run businesses in their communities. The program would reward NextGen fellows with a $120,000 two-year stipend for living and startup expenses as well as health benefits. Fellows would then have access to various resources to help them start and grow their businesses. In addition, the NextGen bill would provide fellows with access to advice and mentorship through SBA resource partners, as well as valuable networking opportunities. The program would also give the fellows assistance breaking into the world of federal contracting. But most importantly, NextGen would allow underserved entrepreneurs to obtain the capital traditional financial institutions so often deny them. As part of the program, NextGen fellows would have access to SBA-backed lenders to receive access to credit. Lastly, the program would establish a fund to encourage private investors by providing leverage to those who make an equity investment in a core member's business. I hope that today's hearing allows us to examine new ideas like the Next Generation Entrepreneurship Core Act and others. By revitalizing American entrepreneurship, we can transform our economy to be more productive, inclusive, and prosperous. I'd now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Kim, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Crow, and good morning to everyone who's joining us in the room and also virtually. I would like to welcome our witnesses too. Today, we turn our attention to a topic that is paramount: small businesses' jobs, and whether the current environment can help the nation and its millions of small businesses recover from COVID-19 pandemic. In May, the national unemployment rate was a dismal 5.8%, which is virtually unchanged from April, and still far higher than before the pandemic, when it was a low 3.5%. In my home state of California, the May unemployment rate was a stunning 7.9%. In my congressional district, San Bernardino County registered 7.3% unemployment, and Orange County 5.9%. Small businesses are still suffering. They are doing their best to regain footing after the COVID-19 pandemic, but they are facing dismal national employment numbers, increasing inflation, labor shortages, and higher costs for their materials. The small business job situation remains extremely challenging. Entrepreneurs are offering higher wages, cash bonuses, or other incentives, but still unable to attract workers. In May, almost half of the small business owners surveyed by NFIB, 48%, said they are unable to find workers to fill jobs. Moreover, they face a very uncertain future with higher inflation, more regulations, increasing mandates, skyrocketing taxes, and unprecedented job vacancies threatening their recovery. Small businesses are the kindling that light up the American economy. So when they struggle, so does our nation. According to the Federal Reserve's May 2021 Beige Book, businesses, and particularly small businesses, are continuing to cope with a very difficult economic environment. The negative impact of supply chain and production disruptions, widespread shortages of materials and labor, and delivery delays make it challenging to get products to consumers. Just this month, the Port of Los Angeles said ships wait on average about 5 days to get in, adding to the cost of doing businesses for entrepreneurs. In normal times, those ships don't have to wait at all. Small firms are plagued by consistently rising costs and more expensive goods used to make their products. So with the generous enhanced federal unemployment payments, employment has clearly not shown robust numbers, and businesses still can't fill open jobs. Although some rates are ending the enhanced unemployment payments, the jobs outlook remains uncertain. Small businesses comprise 95% of U.S. companies, and they represent half of our nation's workforce, and they are major drivers of new job growth, creating 64% of the net new jobs. At a time when these firms are working tirelessly to get back on their feet, the new administration is threatening them with repealing the tax benefits of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and other tax increases, and proposing more regulations and red tape, exactly the wrong environment for our nation's best job creators. A recent Tax Foundation analysis found the combined effects of tax changes and spending in President Biden's American Jobs Plan would reduce the U.S. goods domestic product in the long run and result in 101,000 fewer U.S. jobs. Imagine that, a jobs plan that will result in fewer jobs. Think about it. Sadly, my home state of California is a case study on what high taxes and burdensome regulations can do to temper job economic growth. So let's learn from the misguided policies enacted by Sacramento, and let's not implement them at the national level. There is no doubt that the outlook for small businesses is more uncertainty. However, small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups are some of the most innovative and resilient businesses in the nation. They are often nimble, fast, and they can adapt to any situation. Unfortunately, the current environment is creating headwinds that prevent growth, expansion, and job creation. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the ways we can support pro-growth policies that drive our nation's small businesses forward, not backwards. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. The gentlewoman yields back. I'd like to take a moment to explain how this hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your microphone is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. And with that, I'd like to start by introducing our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. John Deary. Am I pronouncing that right, Mr. Deary?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. John Deary, the founder and president of the Center for American Entrepreneurship. CAE is a nonpartisan research and policy organization whose mission is to improve the policy circumstances of American entrepreneurs and startups. Mr. Deary is the former acting CEO of the Financial Services Forum and a former officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Welcome, Mr. Deary. Our next witness is Dr. J.D. LaRocque, the president and CEO of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, a global nonprofit organization that provides high-quality entrepreneurship education to middle and high school students from under-resourced communities, as well as programs for college students and adults. Previously, Dr. LaRocque served as the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Commonwealth Corporation, where he chaired Governor Baker's Commission on Digital Innovation and Lifelong Learning. He also served as senior education advisor to Senator Ted Kennedy. Welcome, Dr. LaRocque. Our third witness is Ms. Denise Earhart, the Director of Business Pathways at Mi Casa Resource Center. She oversees, and that's in my district, so special place in my heart for Mi Casa. She oversees the strategic advancement of the Business Pathways Department, which supports entrepreneurs through all stages of business development, helping them explore, launch, and grow their business through bilingual training, consulting, access to capital, and holistic support services. She previously worked with the city of Maricopa, Arizona as the Director of Economic Development. Welcome, Ms. Earhart. I will now yield to the ranking member, Ms. Kim, to introduce our final witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our final witness is Craig Atkin, President and CEO of Intelligence 360 in Sugar Land, Texas. Intelligence 360 is a business-to-business news aggregation company for top companies across the nation. Mr. Atkin has almost 30 years of experience in information products, software, and technology. He manages the operations of Intelligence 360, including product engineering, marketing, and business development. Prior to founding Intelligence 360, Mr. Atkin was a member of the applications team at LexisNexis. And before that, he assisted in implementing new web capabilities for Dow Jones and Company. He also was instrumental in the rollout of the Wall Street Journal Interactive Edition, Barron's Online, and Dow Jones Interactive, and supported risk management solutions for Dun & Bradstreet. Welcome, Mr. Atkin. We look forward to your testimony, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day running your small business to talk with us. I would also like to welcome the other witnesses and look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, and welcome, Mr. Atkin, as well. Mr. Deary, we will begin with you. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crow and Ranking Member Kim and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Despite strong job creation in recent months, the focus of today's hearing remains urgently important. Even if the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports on Friday that 1 million jobs have been created in June, as some economists have forecast, U.S. payrolls will still be down almost 7 million from pre-COVID levels, and as many as 10 million jobs short of what total employment would have been had the pandemic not happened. Which is why I appreciate the opportunity to express CA's strong support for the Next Generation Entrepreneurship Corps Act, co-sponsored by you, Mr. Chairman, and Troy Balderson in the House. Along with Senators Chris Coon and Tim Scott in the Senate. The act will encourage entrepreneurship and job creation in underserved areas across the country among diverse background entrepreneurs who will receive startup capital, mentoring, and other support to help them start new businesses in distressed and low-income areas. As members of this subcommittee are no doubt aware, research in recent years has shown that new businesses or startups are responsible for most net new job creation. Existing companies also create jobs, of course, but they also shed jobs, as many as 1 million a year in aggregate as they become more efficient, incorporate capital and technology, and increasingly focus on what they do best. By stark contrast, new businesses create an average of about 3 million jobs each year. Startups also contribute to job creation more generally as a powerful driver of economic growth. Thanks to the work of American economist Robert Solow, who won the Nobel Prize for this insight, we know that economic growth is driven principally by gains in productivity, driven by innovation. The great significance of Solow's work is that it not only identified the nature of economic growth, but also identified its principal source. That's because economists have long understood that innovation, particularly major or disruptive innovation, comes disproportionately from new businesses. Unfortunately, as scholars at the Kauffman Foundation, the Brookings Institution, and elsewhere have documented, entrepreneurship in America is struggling. Between 2009 and 2019, the number of new businesses launched in America each year dropped by about 100,000 below the historical trend, meaning that over that decade, the United States experienced a startup deficit of about 1 million fewer new firms over that period. Just as alarming as you mentioned, Chairman Crow, economists Bob Lighton and Ian Hathaway have shown that rates of entrepreneurship, that is, the fraction of all businesses in the United States that are new, has fallen near a 4-decade low. To find out why, my colleagues and I get out of Washington on a regular basis and conduct roundtables with entrepreneurs in towns and cities across the country. Here's some of what they tell us. We have the jobs, and we need to fill them in order to survive, but we can't find enough people who have the skills that we need. Our immigration policies exacerbate that problem because they undermine our ability to attract and retain the world's best and most innovative talent. Limited access to portable and affordable health care, a lack of affordable child care, record student debt, and retirement savings uncertainty make entrepreneurship especially risky. Access to sufficient capital is a constant sufficient startup capital is a constant challenge. A regulatory burden, complexity, and uncertainty distracts entrepreneurs from focusing on their businesses, increasing the chances of mistakes or even failure. And a number of aspects of our tax code are unsupportive of or even hostile to startups and their investors. In conclusion, Chairman Crow, thriving entrepreneurship is the essential pathway to faster economic growth and job creation, and revitalizing American entrepreneurship requires changes in public policy. Fortunately, we have a very good sense of what needs to be done. Research conducted in recent years, together with input from entrepreneurs by way of roundtables of the sort that I mentioned, has produced a uniquely credible pro-entrepreneurship agenda that, if enacted, would dramatically enhance the circumstances for new business formation, survival, and growth, which, as you pointed out, is so important, particularly in the post-COVID recovery period. That agenda is provided as the appendix to my written testimony. The Next Generation Entrepreneurship Core Act is an important part of that agenda and is an excellent example of the kind of pro-entrepreneurship policy that America needs and deserves now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deary. Mr. LaRocque, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crow, Ranking Member Kim, and members of the committee. I'm honored to share what we at the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, NIFTE, have learned from providing entrepreneurship education in 14 countries and 25 states, including 47,000 students this year. NIFTE was founded on the belief that entrepreneurship education ignites passion and opens doors for students in under-resourced communities. Our model features engaging curriculum taught mostly in public schools, buttressed by community mentors and volunteers. Our programs culminate in pitch competitions, where students compete for seed funding to launch their businesses. We believe in inclusive capitalism, and NIFTE alumni have built brands, launched scores of businesses, and created thousands of jobs. Through the Next Generation Entrepreneur Core Act, our nation can provide future entrepreneurs even more equitable access to the productive tools of capitalism. To underscore the importance of the Act, I'd like to discuss 3 issues. First, the barriers that entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities face are systemic and require robust intervention. Second, access to sustained mentorship bolsters entrepreneurship in ways that financial resources alone cannot. Finally, inclusive entrepreneurship is a vital component right now to our nation's economic and social recovery from COVID-19. First, the barriers. According to the Department of Commerce, our minority-owned businesses are more likely to be denied credit, and even when they do receive loans, pay higher interest rates. CNBC recently reported that 80% of Black-owned businesses fail within the first 18 months. That's significantly more than the 30% of all small businesses that close by their second year. Our education and workforce development systems are starting to break down these barriers by addressing the first systemic inequality, access to learning about entrepreneurship itself. States like Florida and Texas, national philanthropies like American Student Assistance are now supporting widespread opportunities for entrepreneurship education, as well as programs that start students early on a process of career discovery. We've seen the difference that this makes. NIFTY alumna Mary Blackford first realized in high school that she could use entrepreneurship to make systemic change. Now, just down the road from us in Ward 7, she's building Market 7. This 7,000 square foot market will establish space for a community grocer and neighborhood micro-entrepreneurs to address food access and create employment opportunities. Mary is the very example of the kind of emerging entrepreneur that the Next Generation Entrepreneur Corps Act seeks to identify and support. Next, the value of mentorship. At NIFTY, corporate volunteers from companies like Citi, Santander, Intuit, PayPal, SAP, Microsoft, and Ernst & Young, EY, which recently launched the Entrepreneurs Access Network to help Black, Latino, and women entrepreneurs, all provide essential mentorship to our high school and middle school students. Similarly, the mentorship proposed in the Next Generation Entrepreneur Corps Act will remove barriers and accelerate achievement. NIFTY alumnus Andres Cardona was attending high school in Miami and considering dropping out to help his mother pay the bills, when a NIFTY course helped him realize that he could start his own business while staying in school. A decade later, his elite basketball academy is thriving, with 20 employees and multiple sites generating seven-figure revenue annually. Mentorship was an essential part of his journey, and Andres still meets with his mentor regularly. Finally, the importance of entrepreneurship to post-COVID economic recovery. As you know, the pandemic vitiated minority-owned businesses. CNBC reported that between February and April 2020, Black-owned businesses declined by 41%, compared to a 17% decline among white-owned businesses. Black, Latino, and Asian-owned businesses all experienced outsized closures and declines in cash balances, according to the Fed. Simply put, as we come out of COVID, our economy cannot recover fully without entrepreneurship. And there's a legislative vehicle that provides a timely opportunity to help. The Next Generation Entrepreneur Corps Act should be included in the American Jobs Plan to accelerate post-COVID recovery through entrepreneurship. In closing, entrepreneurship is inextricably woven into the American dream. When I think about what that means, I think about NIFTY students at Nicholas Junior High School in Fullerton, California, getting encouragement from their EY mentors while they compete in one of our global entrepreneurship competitions. I think about Robert Refkin, CEO of Compass, the real estate company. He got his first exposure to entrepreneurship through a NIFTY summer camp. Compass recently made its IPO and raised $450 million, and Robert is now on track to be the next and youngest Black billionaire. Finally, I think about the thousands of young adults who, with Congress's support, will become the inaugural cohort of the Next Generation Entrepreneur Corps. The American dream belongs to all of us, and entrepreneurship also belongs to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. LaRocque. Ms. Earhart, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crow and Ranking Member Kim. It is my distinct honor to be in attendance today virtually and to be able to speak on behalf of the small business community that we are so privileged to work with at Mi Casa Resource Center. I'd like to share a little history about the agency I work for because I believe it gives insight and credibility to my testimony. In the late 1970s, Mi Casa began offering job training programs for women to help them break into higher paying jobs. Recognizing self-employment as another viable route to economic stability, Mi Casa expanded in the mid-1980s to include bilingual business development services to nurture the entrepreneurial spirit of low-income female and minority-owned businesses. As Mi Casa has grown and developed, we have recognized the need for programs to advance economic self-sufficiency for the entire family. In 2016, our mission evolved to reflect an expanded target population to advance the economic success of families with limited opportunities. As you shared, Chairman.
Ms. Earhart, if I could stop you for one second. We're having a hard time hearing you. We've tried to turn it up on our end, but I think you might need to speak up slightly or get closer to your microphone if possible.
Sure. Is this a little bit better?
It is a little bit better, yes.
Okay. The Women's Business Center at Mi Casa Resource Center supports entrepreneurs through all the stages of business development, helping them plan, launch, manage, and grow their business through bilingual consulting, long-term training, as well as business-related workshops and resources. In 2020, when we collectively experienced a global pandemic, we had to double down on our services and work even harder to meet the needs of the highly vulnerable community. We were able to help over 1,800 businesses, 45 new businesses were launched, over $2.7 million in capital were obtained, with over $1 million of that being COVID relief. 27 new jobs were created and 311 jobs were retained. Additionally, 24 patents were issued through the Pro Bono Patent Program, which is a partnership with the USPTO. So I stand before you to say that the Next Generation Entrepreneurship Corps Act has the ability to be a catalyst for distressed communities. At Mi Casa, what we have seen is the systemic issues that have been shared earlier today. And what we do is we work hand in hand with these individuals to remove barriers to success. A program like Next Gen has the ability to ignite economic development within distressed communities that continue to see brain drain, which is talent leaving a local community. Ultimately, Next Gen would be instrumental in creating places where underserved entrepreneurs can reinvest, hire local, make a local, national, and hopefully in some cases, a global change. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of women-owned, minority-owned businesses from the Denver metro area.
Thank you, Ms. Earhart. We appreciate it. And I think the issue was on our end, actually. We turned the volume up in the room. So appreciate you bearing with us, and I think we're fixing it on our end. Thank you. Mr. Etkin, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crow, Ranking Member Kim, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Craig Etkin. I'm the president and CEO at Intelligence 360, a sales intelligence company that provides real-time data to clients to uncover new business opportunities. In short, we help other businesses succeed. In 2018, I graduated from the SBA Leaders Initiative, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary job the team at SBA in Houston does under the leadership of Tim Jeffcoat, SBA District Director, and the work of Yusuf Muhammad, Southwest Regional Vice President at SCORE. According to the SBA website, since its inception in 2008, the SBA Emerging Leaders Initiative has trained over 5,000 small business owners like myself, created over 6,500 jobs, generating over $300 million in new financing, and securing over $3 billion in government contracts. According to SBA's resource partner, Interrise, in 2018, Emerging Leaders alumni businesses saw an average revenue growth of 36%. Latino-owned businesses saw 64% average growth, and minority-owned businesses saw 43% average growth. In addition, minority-owned businesses operating in lower-income communities saw 77% revenue growth, and 60% of new employees were hired locally. It's from that perspective that I offer my testimony today. While the year-long health emergency and associated lockdowns impacted everyone, some were more hurt and continue to be than others. Small businesses took the brunt of the pandemic. It's not a surprise, considering small businesses typically operate under tight profit margins and are more vulnerable to fluctuating economic conditions, as well as changes in consumer behavior. The coronavirus triggered extremes in both cases. Small businesses are the backbone of the US economy. and are absorbing an outsized portion of the direct and indirect impacts of the coronavirus. Policymakers in Washington should do what they can, not only to shore up current job creators, but encourage a new wave of entrepreneurialism more broadly. There are many existing successful programs through SBA's Office of Entrepreneurial Development, SBDCs, WBCs, and the Office of Entrepreneurial Education, SCORE, Learning Center, and the Emerging Leaders Initiative. Congress, through the American Rescue Plan, has already allocated $100 million to the Community Navigator Pilot Program for targeted outreach for small business in underserved communities. Rather than what is outlined in HR 1226, why not promote access to capital to these small businesses through the SBA microloan program rather than a stipend? Getting a microloan can be a great first step in creating credit history and building financial relationships needed to sustain and grow a business long term. Access to education and mentorship is available through SCORE, the Learning Center, and advanced training in the Emerging Leaders Initiative. Through community navigators connecting with new entrepreneurs through trusted community relationships and utilizing existing programs at SBA, it's my belief we will see not just several hundred, but thousands of new businesses and new jobs created. Thank you for reviewing my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Etkin. I'm going to begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I would like to start with Ms. Earhart. Ms. Earhart, our community has areas that have been underserved for a very long time. And Mi Casa in particular, and your work in particular, works to prompt and invigorate entrepreneurship in some of the more underserved folks and populations. I'd love your view as to what you view as the primary barrier as you're working with prospective entrepreneurs. What is the primary barrier they face in starting their businesses?
Thank you, Chairman Crow. What we see historically are systemic issues within the community. It really is, for a lot of the Latinx population, is these families are working together, trying to stay together, and ultimately there is that lack of leadership, mentorship. Through programs like Mi Casa, we work closely through very similarly as the other programs that were talked about today, to really shepherd individuals through leadership training, business plan development, presenting different opportunities to access to capital. But ultimately, I think it's just the lack of seeing individuals like themselves be leaders in their own community. So I think that's why this bill really has the opportunity to ignite and really develop these distressed communities in a way that has not been done before.
Thank you. And I know we've spoken before about the support ecosystem in a community. Can you kind of just expand on some of the prior conversations about what an ecosystem means for a community and how that lack of an ecosystem could be overcome?
Sure. The support of the ecosystem, can be modeled in multiple different ways. At Mi Casa, we do that by peer-to-peer connection. And then we take that, depending on where they are in their business, we then connect them to mentors within the community. Ultimately, what you see when these local business owners are successful is the stickiness, right? They're able to hire locally, reinvest locally, keep their talent, their businesses. So, it really builds upon the stepping stones that are created. And ultimately, what you're looking for is for these entrepreneurs and these small businesses to not necessarily leave these distressed communities, but turn around and reinvest into them. Therefore, the ecosystem is strengthening that local economy.
Thank you, Ms. Earhart. Mr. Deary, I wonder if you might talk or expand on the issue of access to capital and why access to SBA lending vehicles is in some ways better than access to other traditional financial institution lenders, and what barriers might exist for those traditional lenders or commercial lenders, and why the SBA vehicles in particular, in some circumstances, are more beneficial for entrepreneurs.
Sure. The SBA plays a critical role, particularly with regard to bank capital for new and small businesses. I'm a former bank supervisor at the New York Fed, and I can make a very good argument that banks are not the ideal source of capital for startups. Startups are inherently risky. Half fail by their fifth year. And we don't want, as much as we want to be supportive of startups, we don't want to damage the balance sheets of the nation's banks in pursuit of other national priorities. We got into trouble doing that in the housing crisis, of course. The great service, the SBA bridges that gap between depositories and new and small businesses by assuming some of the risk. And that assumption of risk becomes critical to enable bank capital to be a source of capital for startups in particular. Of course, other sources of capital, from investors instead of depository institutions are also critical for startups and are sort of uniquely appropriate in light of the risk profile of startups. And these sources are angel capital, venture capital, equity capital, where the investors bear the risks, and if the startup fails, they take the hit instead of a bank or a depository.
Thank you, Mr. Deary. My time has expired, so I'd now like to yield to the ranking member of the committee, Ms. Kim, the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. I've heard from many employers in my district that not only are they having difficulty finding workers, but they're finding the workers for the right positions and right workers for the right job. And I think, Mr. Deary, you also listed that in your testimony as one of the top issues you and your colleagues have been hearing from small businesses as you conducted many roundtable discussions. So for the entire panel, would you be able to elaborate how we can increase worker skills and transition workers to new skills?
Sure. You're quite right. There is a lot of attention paid, and rightly so, to access to capital, but access to appropriately skilled talent is just as important for a startup. You can't turn your idea, you can't turn your dream into a successful business without the staff, the employees that have the skills that you need. And we hear that at virtually every roundtable that we do. As I said, we have the jobs, we need to fill them to survive. We can't find enough folks that have the skills that we need. That is really an indictment of the U.S. education system. We're simply not producing enough people that have the skills that 21st century businesses need, including new and small businesses. The bullseye of that, if you will, is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. There's been a great deal of discussion about how do we address that. Certainly, it's a very complex question that has a complex answer. But certainly, I'm of the view, and we hear this from startups, that a great underused asset in this country is the nation's community college system. There are 1,200 community colleges across the country. They are typically the first experience of higher education for immigrants, for example. They're great sources for people to be able to upskill, to get stackable credentials, to lifelong learning. So among the many things that can be done to fix that problem, I think leveraging the community college system is critical. Also, we need a more active conversation between the business community in this country and educators, so that businesses can tell educators, here are the skills that we need, and if you're willing to amend your criteria, your curriculum to teach those skills, we'll hire those people. There's not enough communication, in our view, going on between the business community and the education community.
Thanks for mentioning that. That's why I introduced the Innovations in Informal STEM Learning Act, and hopefully that will prepare our next generation of workers for the right jobs. And so I want to thank you for mentioning that, and I do want to pose the next question to all panel. Small businesses create a majority of the net new jobs, but they're facing increasing cost, inflation, price pressures, taxes. So I think you will all agree that these pressures they are keeping them from expanding and adding jobs. So I would like to ask the panel, what price pressures would you like to see eliminated? Dr. LaRocque, you want to start?
Thank you, Ranking Member Kim. You know, one factor I'd point to is just the proliferation of regulation and the impact that that can have on startup entrepreneurs in particular. At NIFTY, we work with many, many graduates of our program who try to launch and sustain actual businesses. And more than taxes, more than other policy issues, the regulatory burden that they face and the administrative burden is something that comes up a lot for our learners. In particular, because these many of our alumni are really trying to go it on their own, as many entrepreneurs do. If I could just double back onto your previous question, I'd like to underscore a couple of the points that Mr. Deary made in response to your question. A real opportunity for our education system is to do much more to expose young learners to the types of jobs and careers that exist. That's why the efforts of national philanthropies like American Student Assistance are so important, and why we get a lot of traction at NIFTY with career and technical education leaders, because they understand that you don't have to be a welder or an electrician or an auto repair technician. You can have an auto repair shop. You can have an electrician business. And so we find homes in those types of schools where educators are making the connection between entrepreneurship, the broader economy, and personal self-fulfillment in the doing of one's job. Lastly, and briefly, I'd also like to underscore the particular opportunity now to help community colleges fully embrace entrepreneurship education in the way that we see four-year public and mostly private higher education doing. The gaps that exist between community college entrepreneurship opportunities and what we see in other parts of higher ed sustain some of the inequities that we see in the system. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Bordeaux, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Crow and Ranking Member Kim, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. I want to start off with one of the issues that was raised by Mr. Deary and elaborated on some of his testimony, which is about the rates of entrepreneurship declining, the concurrent decline in productivity. And I'm just curious if you could elaborate more on why this is happening, and are there certain sectors where we have seen this decline more rapidly over time?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Alarmingly, the research that has, I'll speak to your question as to particular sectors first, if I might. Alarmingly, the research that has been done on the decline of the share of all businesses that are new, sort of an interesting gauge of the entrepreneurialness of the U.S. economy, if you will, indicates that the decline is pervasive. It's happening, and I'm referring specifically to the very famous Brookings paper by Bob Lighton and Ian Hathaway, who documented this decline in ways that had not been done before. They found it's happening in all 50 states. It's happening in all but a handful of 360 metro areas that they examined, and it's happening across every industry sector. So it is pervasive. In terms of why it's happening, that is exactly the question that I asked in my own professional transition from financial supervision. When I found out about all this, I got terribly interested in it, and I went and I asked Bob Lighton and Ian Hathaway and other people who had done the research, why is this happening? And they said, we don't know. We have certain ideas and theories, suspicions, but fundamentally we don't understand it. And it was with that in mind that I set out on the first road trip of doing roundtables with entrepreneurs around the country, asking them quite simply, what's in your way? What's going on? Why is this happening? I wrote a book about that called Where the Jobs Are, and it was as a follow-up to that book that I decided to launch CAE, to work with people like you to fix that. So if you look through our agenda, that is the appendix to my written testimony, it is chock full of specific ideas grouped in all of the subject categories that we hear from entrepreneurs at roundtables that my colleagues and I continue to do on a regular basis.
Okay, so we've got some reading to do on that. Thank you on that. I just, it does occur to me that, prior generations, my grandparents' generation, everybody had a small business, it was just sort of part of the fabric of their lives. And now so much of our business is consolidated, it's the Walmarts, it's the Targets, and it's just very, very hard for people to get up and going. Just another huge issue. My district is very, very diverse. And this is for Mrs. Earhart. Wish we could duplicate your program all over the country. It sounds like a fabulous program. Just wanted to check in with you as you work with women and minority-owned businesses. Are there things that we could be doing or the Small Business Administration could be doing to help with the minority-owned businesses, help entrepreneurs from communities of color be able to access programs better or know the resources that are available to them?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. I think there's always more that we can do. One of my mentors always said, we have to educate the educated. We have to create an awareness of what exists in the community and how to access it. I'm incredibly honored and privileged to work for Mi Casa Resource Center. I know that the individuals that walk through our doors feel like they're walking through a university, a local community college, and therefore they are leveling up, we're leveling up their experience, their access, and their connectivity to other resources within the community. So I think that the experience overall is so incredibly important. Funding for programs like the Women's Business Center or other programs that support entrepreneurship in distressed communities that focus on the BIPOC population is critical because these are the individuals that have the interest, the desire. These are the new builders of the new America. And I think that we just really have to continue to support programs like the Women's Business Centers and other programs that the SBA has supported in the past.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Now I would like to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, also a fellow fanatic of apprenticeships, as I am. So you are recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Garbarino.
Thank you, Chairman. A big fan of apprenticeships. I don't think everybody should go to college. I think there's a lot of people, like you said, Mr. Locke, that you can become a plumber and then all of a sudden run a plumbing business. And one of my good friends from high school did that, and he makes a lot more money than I do, I'll tell you that. So, Mr. Etkin, I have a question. The Biden administration released Americans' Jobs Plans in March, which focused on not just regular infrastructure, but other things as well, not brick and mortar infrastructure. Right now, we're in negotiations for doing just a brick and mortar infrastructure bill. How do you think prioritizing true infrastructure projects over non-infrastructure spending help increase job creation and hiring?
Well, thank you for the question. My grandfather was a plumber, so he never went to college and ran a very successful business. We really need to focus in this country on rebuilding. There is a lot of need in infrastructure here domestically, and the initiatives to focus on roads and bridges and airports and really rebuilding our inner cities, I think is a great first step in driving new entrepreneurial innovation. There are a lot of initiatives that I can't necessarily speak to from a policy perspective, but I know that when companies can rely on their safe neighborhoods and their roads and bridges to get to work are sound, they have the ability to hire and run business from a good foundation in their neighborhoods. So I wish I could answer the question beyond the brick and mortar. There are a lot of spending initiatives that I see that a lot of people are looking at going, why? I mean, the numbers are staggering to small business owners to hear coming out of Washington in the trillions of dollars. And quite frankly, I think it's perpetuating an environment of fear right now in small business owners. They're concerned about inflation. They're concerned about hiring. A lot of their new costs are going into labor. They're having to attract workers back in from sitting at home, small restaurants. I work with hundreds of entrepreneurs across the country, mostly in B2B, but some in B2C that are having real problems bringing workers back and staffing up. And I think that's due a lot to an environment of fear. I mean, we literally have moved from a healthcare crisis to a crisis of fear in small business. Business owners are unsure of their future. They're unsure of being able to reopen fully. And I think a lot of that is been perpetuated by a lot of rhetoric coming from politicians from all levels of government. People are scared. They need to get back on their own feet. They need to hire and get back to work. And there are a lot of things being thrown up as roadblocks to doing that. And so unfortunately, you see we're in a position where companies are struggling, and they're struggling to get back to normal. And bringing employees back to work is, I think a big part of the way they need to move forward.
So, but Mr. Etkin, I just want to comment on that, because I actually met with the new CEO of the Chamber of Commerce yesterday. We had a meeting with her, and part of the discussion was how about half of Americans, 49%, who lost their jobs during the pandemic, reported they are not active at all or not very active in searching for employment. I had spoken to businesses in my district that are searching for jobs. They want people to come back to work. They just can't find the workers. But it sounds like you're saying, it might not just be solely the person not wanting to come back to work. It might, the employers might be a little hesitant in bringing people back. Is that what you're saying, or did I mishear you?
No, that's absolutely right. And especially in areas where lockdowns are still, I mean, you see people waiting in lines just to go into a grocery store. I travel around the country. I mean, we opened in Texas very early. I think it was a good idea. It was scorned by many in the political circles across the country, as a bad policy decision. But I see the benefits of, opening business back up again. So not only do you see it, a hesitancy from business owners about an uncertain path forward, but also a climate of fear with going back to work.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman. Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Now I will recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, also a serial entrepreneur, Mr. Phillips, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would argue that nothing is more American and wonderfully politically unifying than entrepreneurship. So thank you for holding this meeting today, to our ranking member and chair, and to our wonderful witnesses. In my experience, to become an entrepreneur, you need inspiration, preparation, human capital, and financial capital. Those are the 4 legs of the stool. And on the subject of financial capital, I think we're all aware that only 3 urban areas in the entire country, on both the East and West Coast, Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York City, currently account for 80% of all venture capital investment. So on a subject that our chairman already referenced, Mr. Deary, what role can Congress play very specifically to better encourage a more equitable distribution of startup capital to parts of the country that right now are starved of it?
Thank you for the question. It is an enormously important issue. It is one that we hear at every single roundtable that we do around the country. There is simply not an equitable distribution of venture capital across the country. Just to give you a quick example, it's just one that I know off the top of my head. I'm sorry, it's not your state, but it's a nearby state. At a roundtable in Michigan, we were told by entrepreneurs and investors there that the state of Michigan has access to or gets about 1% of total venture capital in the country, and 50% of that 1% is in Ann Arbor. And so the rest of the state has to share the 50% of the 1% that they get. We have been involved in, as you know, I believe that you were a House co-sponsor of this piece of legislation, and we thank you for that. There is a bill that was introduced and led by Senator Klobuchar in the Senate, along with Tim Kaine and Angus King, Ro Khanna, yourself, Tim Ryan, and Terry Sewell, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, in the House. And what that bill is called the New Business Preservation Act. And what that bill did, it borrowed from a very interesting experience that happened in Israel in the late 90s. At that time, about practically 100% of venture capital was in the United States. It was an American phenomenon. Israel had lots and lots of new businesses stemming from the fact that when the Soviet Union collapsed in the late 90s, in early 90s, a lot of folks immigrated to Israel, and a lot of those folks were engineers and scientists. A lot of them started businesses. So there was a lot of entrepreneurship and no venture capital. And the way the Israeli government tried to address that is they offered a one-to-one match of public taxpayer funds with private capital to lure American venture capitalists over to Israel to look around and consider investing in Israeli startups. It was enormously successful. We have the same problem, except it's inside the country. We have 80% of venture capital in 3 cities. And so the bill would do exactly that. It would create a program administered by Treasury to offer a one-to-one match of public dollars for venture capital invested in promising startups in heartland states. I think it would be enormously impactful. Everybody we talk to about it around the country is enthusiastic, both startups, entrepreneurs, and investors.
I appreciate that, and perhaps we can even weave that into the chairman's legislation to inspire the
That would be great.
of high potential entrepreneurs. Mr. LaRock, I got to say, I love NIFTY's entire model, and I was really lucky. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. I was exposed to it at a young age. And perhaps equally importantly, I remember Business Day in elementary school, which really inspired me and introduced me to the notion of becoming an entrepreneur myself. So in the spirit of rowing further upstream than we typically do, what specific steps can Congress take to inspire young people, at least introduce them to the notion of becoming entrepreneurs?
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the kudos to our organization. Honestly, I think the foundational concepts of the Next Gen bill are what's needed. The reason that we at NIFTY are supporting the bill is because it reflects so much of what we've seen work with our own model. That's number one. The second is, I really do think that our education system, and not just career and technical education schools, but academic comprehensive high schools and middle schools, need to start embedding career exploration and career-oriented education, including entrepreneurship, starting as early as the 5th grade, but most certainly by middle school. Again, innovative philanthropies like American Student Assistance are putting some funding into this, and that's great, but it's a drop in the bucket of what's needed. And when Congress has the opportunity to review the Perkins Act, ESEA, WIOA, which has some allowable activities for youth, I would encourage Congress to take new opportunities to devote more funding for youth entrepreneurship, at least more flexibility.
Love it. And I might just, as I close, perhaps we should consider changing our name to the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Might send a nice message to the country. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Newman, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member, for putting together this great discussion this morning. And I will echo Mr. Phillips' great idea. I think that's a wonderful idea, so I'm on board for that. So thank you all. Thank you to our guests today. This has been more validating, and I mean this in the best compliment, more validating than illuminating, because this is what I hear in my district, that I think Mr. Deary started out sharing what some of the challenges are for our small businesses moving forward, coming out of the pandemic, and as we work through our recovery in our economy. It's what I hear is that, that we don't have enough skilled workers, therefore we need more workforce training, right? That our small businesses don't have enough access to capital, that childcare is a huge problem. We've lost 70% of our childcare structures in this nation as a result of the pandemic, and we have to support that. There's been denial of credit, particularly in Black and brown communities of business. And then our immigration policies don't allow us to bring wonderful folks in to do the work that is needed, whether it is currently skilled workforce training and or other. So I think we all know, and we've all been through Econ 101, that the only way the economy grows is when we have more people being productive. So our immigration policies right now are a little bit challenging. We need to move forward and be in the 21st century around that. And then lastly, mentorship is a problem. So really a long list, right? So I'm going to challenge Mr. Deary and Dr. LaRock to give me your top 3 And the reason I ask you for your top three amongst those is that I would say we're trying to build legislation that prioritizes the biggest problems. And so if you can prioritize among that list of things that that Mr. Deary shared to address, that Congress can address, that would be super helpful. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Deary, if you wouldn't mind answering.
Sure. These kinds of questions are very hard. Your top answer, your top three, but I understand the spirit behind the question. In reflecting the conversation that we've had here today, I mean, if I were forced to pick three, I would say, first of all, entrepreneurship in America today remains an overwhelmingly white and male phenomenon. We've been talking today about how important entrepreneurship is as a pathway to economic development and job creation. It's also a pathway to economic empowerment and financial empowerment for the entrepreneurs themselves. And so I would make a policy priority, to make American entrepreneurship more inclusive. And that's exactly why we at CAE are an enormous fan of the Next Gen Act. Because the specific intent of that is to promote entrepreneurship in underserved areas and among underrepresented aspects of our population. We need more women entrepreneurs who are active. We need more Black and brown entrepreneurs who are active, and so I would make that at the top of the list. The other two, we've talked about as Representative Phillips just referred to. If there were two other things that entrepreneurs need aside from their great ideas, it's capital and access to properly skilled people. So pursuing all ideas and all options in terms of expanding access to capital, and there are lots of ideas in the appendix to my testimony, and then also in terms of, as Congressman Kim put her finger on, the upskilling and the workforce training, the lifelong learning to make sure that entrepreneurs have access to the people that they need to turn their dreams into productive businesses.
Thank you. And Dr. LaRocque, if you wouldn't mind adding to Mr. Deary's comments.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd associate myself with Mr. Deary's comments and just go back to the three things that I highlighted in my testimony. Focusing any effort on the disparities that exist and really building in equity as a design principle, I think, is vitally important, number one. Second, mentorship, an explicit component around mentorship, is vitally important, because what we've learned working with our nifty entrepreneurs who've gone on to start and sustain businesses is that all of their success still doesn't make up, in many cases, for a lifetime of not having the social capital that they weren't born into. And government policy can't recreate those opportunities easily, but they can stitch together communities of interest, like minority communities and the business community. We do it in a private sector nonprofit way at NIFTY, and I think it can be done through policy as well. And then finally, I'd just briefly underscore what we already talked about regarding opportunities to promote equity and entrepreneurship in the education system as well, particularly in the K-12 education system, but community college as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for your comments. Thank you for being here today, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. So we have time. We're going to do another round for others who want it, and I will begin by recognizing myself for another 5 minutes. I just wanted to kind of expound on this notion of infrastructure, and I'm a huge supporter of the American Jobs Plan, President Biden's plan, because undoubtedly, there's I think, universal agreement that we don't have 21st century infrastructure, that we made investments in infrastructure over 70 years ago after World War II, then we stopped making the investments in infrastructure and even stopped keeping it up, for that matter. And you can't have bridges falling down, can't have roads. You have to expand broadband into vast swaths of America that don't have it to prompt entrepreneurship and level the playing field there. But, one of the largest times of growth in American history was after World War II. There's a number of reasons for that, but one of the biggest reasons is that women entered the workforce. We had an entire segment of the population that was denied access to the workforce before, and then they entered the workforce, and it led to incredible economic growth for their country. So looking at now, we already touched on the issue of immigration, and we have to reform our immigration policies to make it easier for entrepreneurs and incredibly talented people to come here and contribute to our economy. But Ms. Earhart, just expounding on this notion of latent potential, right? We have all of this built up latent potential, incredible talent, entrepreneurs sitting here ready to go. Can you just talk about in our community, if we're able to remove some of those barriers, childcare, healthcare, student debt, lack of ecosystem and mentorship, what would that mean? What would that look like? And how many folks do you think are ready to go to kind of bring our economy up to the next level in the 21st century?
Thank you, Chairman Crow. You know, I smile because I think it's just, there's certainly a buzz within the entrepreneurial community, and you nailed it. You talked a little bit about some of these obstacles, these hurdles, the childcare, the student loan debt. I also, on a regular, will do focus groups and we'll meet with individuals that are going through our career pathway, as well as our small business owners, and they will talk about having to make the choice between getting a job or not going to school because the student loan debt is so overwhelming. So the way I think about it is that we have these small businesses and they're only able to grow to the point of butting up against these obstacles, right? Whether it's the childcare costs. So they're not able to grow. They're not able to reinvest into their businesses because of these broader issues that are really systemic in our society. You know, the childcare costs, lack of access to it is incredibly challenging for the women that we work with. At Mi Casa, we provide childcare on site for individuals that are going through our long-term training. And we see them, they come in with their young kids, and they are so incredibly hopeful for their futures. So I just feel like there is this ecosystem, this buzz of entrepreneurs, but the reality is that they're only able to grow to a certain level because of these broader issues that really put a cap on them. Something else that I would love to add is that earlier someone asked, you know, what are your top three? And I think about financial education. I think that for the entrepreneurs that we work with on a regular basis, their financial acumen is not there, and they lack the confidence to pursue capital investment. So I just think that that's a huge area of opportunity that we can infuse into our youth and then really upskill them through education.
Ms. Kim, the gentlewoman from California, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. I know we've been talking a lot about the American Jobs Plan that President Biden released in March. And since then, both sides have been working diligently behind the scenes to come up with a bipartisan solution that we can get to support, because we do agree that there is a consensus in getting a good infrastructure legislation to get our economy moving. But President Biden's jobs plan calls for, you know, he started with over $2 trillion, and his plan is prioritizing climate change and other spending over infrastructure provisions, and trying to pay for that by raising taxes, including those on the many businesses organized by C corporations and S corporations. But as you know, U.S. Chamber of Commerce came up with the information that many of the C corporations, over 85% of them are small businesses too. So raising taxes on C corporations will not just hurt the large businesses, but it will hurt all businesses, and it will really hurt the economy as well. So I would like to ask the panel, or, you know, one or two of you, given the time, how sharply increasing taxes will hinder the ability of those businesses to grow and create jobs, and if you can cite some specific examples, that would be very helpful. Go ahead,
I'll start.
Mr. Dury.
Well, certainly, Congresswoman, all else being equal, any business, new or existing, would love to keep more of what they earn than less, for sure. Having said that, I think it has a lot to do with what the additional revenue is going to be used for. And I think at the roundtables that we conduct around the country, there is a broad consensus that we need to invest more in infrastructure, which supports the economy, supports business. The other thing I would pass on to you is that the tax issue that we hear more often than any at roundtables is more about tax complexity and uncertainty than where marginal rates happen to be. Business people can build a business around virtually any net number. You know, just give me a number and I can build a business around that. What really drives them crazy and distracts them, takes their eye off the ball, is the complexity and constant uncertainty. So my counsel would be a more simple tax code, a more constant tax code, and let entrepreneurs focus on what they do best, and that's build and grow businesses.
You know, I'd like to ask Mr. Atkin if you can share your perspectives on this.
Yes, thank you. It's amazing to me that at a time where so many small businesses are really just trying to find the new normal, that we're talking about increasing tax burden on small business. They're really having to come out of this pandemic, really look up at what their plan is for the next 2 to 5 years. And now they're facing a policy that's going to increase their tax burden. When they're looking at just bringing people back on board and making it through probably the most difficult experience they've had as a small business owner. We've been in business for 22 years. We've seen the dot-com bubble bust. We've seen 9/11. We've seen the Great Recession. And now we've hopefully made it through the experience of COVID. And it is my feedback that I get from the hundreds of entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs that I work with at all levels, that now is not the time to handcuff business and job creators with tax burdens, especially on non-brick and mortar infrastructure. I think there is consensus around the need to rebuild our roads, our bridges, the infrastructure that people understand are critical in having successful businesses, neighborhoods, and a base to build a future from. But when you start moving outside of that, I think that's when you really look at what are the priorities of this administration in terms of bringing jobs back and really allowing entrepreneurs to be uncuffed from the restrictions that they've seen over the last year. And so it's my opinion that now certainly is not the time to talk about increasing taxes on job creators.
I appreciate your perspectives. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I'd now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Deere, you just touched upon it. Touched upon a couple different things in a couple of your statements, and I don't know if my district is definitely different than my colleagues that are up here. And Ms. Earhart talked about child care, health care limitations there being needing to focus on that to help with job growth. I know for a fact that in my district, businesses have left Long Island because where I am, we don't have sewers. The roads are so old that turning on and getting on a highway, you can't do it with an 18-wheeler because they didn't have them back when they were built. Our energy grid is so low, so that's an issue on my district. You mentioned the brain drain. People are not trained for the proper positions that they need to be now, and the focus on STEM and apprenticeships. So, is it all of the above? Does it matter? Is it different? Where should the focus be? Which one of the what's the chicken? What's the egg? What do we start with? Out of all these different things, we're hearing so much testimony. What do we start with?
It's a very good question, and this is what we're all here to debate. Of course, is I think we all agree on what the issues are, and it's a question of sequencing, a question of prioritizing. Certainly, physical infrastructure. There's a broad consensus that we have. We're way behind the eight ball, and we need to do more now. All you have to do is drive the George Washington Parkway on the other side of the Potomac, and you see that. However, there are other issues that are enormously significant. I'll just focus on one, child care, because we're talking about it. It is true that out of 40 industrial democracies around the country, the United States is the only country that does not have a national child care policy. We're the only one. We did have a national child care policy at one point in our history, and the chairman referred to this sort of, and that was during World War II. And the reason was all the men were overseas fighting the war, and we needed the factories to be staffed. And so there was an enormous publicly funded child care program that led to, after the war, the entry of women into the economy and led to booming economic times, simply because there were so much more people in the economy starting and growing businesses and going to work for other businesses. When we do roundtables with women entrepreneurs. When we started the Senate Entrepreneurship Caucus in March of 2019, the very first event that we did with that caucus was a roundtable of women entrepreneurs that we flew in from all over the country. The top issues that they wanted to talk to the senators about were barriers to them: health care, child care, record student debt, and retirement security uncertainty. Those uncertainties, those life risks, are keeping them from being entrepreneurs. So those are super important issues. If we were to solve them, I'm convinced that it would lead to a very significant boost in economic growth, job creation, tax receipts, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you think we should do that before we do brick and mortar? I mean, like I said,
Yeah.
I mean, in my district, you can't open a restaurant, you can't open a business because the health department will tell you, no, we don't have sewers.
Yes, well, certainly if there are physical impediments to actually opening a business, that's top priority for sure. But I think it would be a mistake to push these other issues back on the back burner. I mean, just continuing very briefly, the average American family pays $10,000 a year for child care for one child. Child care is more expensive than sending a kid to college in 38 states. Every single state in the Union and the District of Columbia fails the government's own definition of affordability in terms of child care. That's a big problem, and it's standing in the way of economic growth.
I did want to, I have a minute left, but one thing I've also heard I have a lot of contractors and other businesses on Long Island that they're saying the costs of goods, inflation is, I mean, they can't bid out projects now, and they can bid out, but the bids can't last longer than 3 days because, lumber, everything's steel, everything's going up. This is for the board, maybe Mr. Etkin or Ms. Dr. LaRocque, if you want to talk about, or Ms. Earhart. What are we hearing from small business now about inflation? How bad is it on their bottom line? Anyone?
Is that directed at me?
Sure, Mr. Etkin, you can start first.
Well, I can speak of it firsthand. I'm in the middle of building a building, and we deal with contractors all day about pricing for materials. And it's been shocking to see the price differences in just, like you said, a matter of weeks on steel, on lumber, on availability, on timelines. Part of my business is monitoring the commercial real estate markets. We see projects in all stages going from design to bid to construction. I think we see that in that industry more than any other. The impacts of supply chain issues coming out of the pandemic, it's a complex issue. It's not simply policy, but long-term inflation is something that we all need to look at and watch closely. Because as I mentioned before, start talking about trillions of dollars of spending, I think that's at the back of everyone's mind, certainly business owners as well, who have to keep an eye on cost of goods. And so it's certainly something to be concerned about.
Thank you, Mr. Etkin. My time has expired. I yield back.
Yes.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Thank you to all the witnesses today for this really enlightening discussion. It's something that is actually, unfortunately, more rare than it should be, and this is something called legislating and debating, which I know is a crazy concept for this body sometimes. But it was great. I learned a lot from all of you, so thank you for taking the time. It's clear that the entrepreneurship crisis is one of the bigger challenges facing this nation. The title of this hearing, Jobs, 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 was a title that we came up with because we wanted to be really clear that we want to get people to work. We want to get more people to work, and it's not just getting them into jobs, but it's also getting them into great jobs and good jobs. And one of the best ways to do that is to grow new businesses, to expand the economic pie. This is a real challenge, but there is also good news in that this is one of the most bipartisan committees in Congress. We work really well together. We don't always agree on how to get there, but we actually do agree on where we want to be in the conclusion and what we're trying to achieve. And look forward to working with all of you and trying to figure out these challenges and the witnesses as well for informing both the staff and the members as we figure this out and have this debate and figure out how we can grow the economic pie and get people to work and really help rebuild the American dream is where we want to be. And part of that is continuing to have the discussion around the Next Generation Entrepreneurship Core Act. I will be the first to say that it won't solve the problem, but it's a first step. And if we take the first step, we can build on that, we can learn from it, we can get people to work. And this is something that obviously both the House and the Senate in a bipartisan way has come together around. So I look forward to continuing to build support for that bill and others like it that we heard about today. So with that, I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.